all. I would like to thank Maaza Mengiste for accepting our invitation to discuss about her latest acclaimed book, The Shadow King. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate you, Maaza, as your book is long listed in the prestigious Booker Prize for 2020. That's a very nice, good job. I also want to extend my heartfelt thanks to my good old friend Hallelujah Lule for accepting our invitation to moderate this session. And just to say very few words about HOHE Awards. It was an Ethiopian literary award started in 2017. And it is an annual award presented for an author of a distinguished book, possessing notable literary merit and critical perspective and illuminating important contemporary issues. The HOHE Award highlights just some of the many good books with broad appeal published in Ethiopia. The award also recognizes those actors who have contributed a lot in advancing reading culture in Ethiopia, including media houses, book critic professionals, organizations creating reading access to disabled people, personalities in advancing education in the country, and the Lifetime Achievement Award. We accept books written in Amharic and other Ethiopian languages. This year, we'll be hosting the fourth award, which is scheduled to take place around first week of December in Addis Ababa. We have about 7 best book of the year categories, including novel, children's book in Amharic and Somali language, poetry, short stories, academic books, and autobiography. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all our different partners, including Sophie Malt, the Addis Ababa University, National Archives and Library Agency, Geneva Global, Ethiopia Reads, last but not least, StudioNet for supporting this novel initiative since the beginning. As has been explained rightfully by Hallelujah, HOHE Award plans to converge interested actors in the public and members and groups of the art and literary community in an online engagement platform. It aims to bring closer arts and related diverse functions that are of huge interest to the wider public. Among others, the functions include better connecting, Ethiopian authors here and abroad, as what we have been doing right now. Writings covering a range of topics such as academic, creative writing, children books, etc. And will be points of focus for our online engagement. Our today event is the first of the series of online engagement platforms, and I hope you will all enjoy it. Thank you for your participation. And now over to you, Hallelujah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ephraim, for the introduction. I want to thank you for HOHE first, and of course for launching this exciting initiative. Because at the end of the day, I think holding the annual awards is one thing, but having this mid-year, regular sessions to promote, the literary industry in Ethiopia and beyond is a commendable initiative. So now I'm moving to Maaza. I think we all know her, but I have to read a brief introduction bio of her. As Ephraim said, of course, her latest book, The Shadow King, is longlisted for the 2020 Booker Prize, but also, it was also shortlisted and it's a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Books Prize. And best book of, it was named the best book of 2019 by New York Times, NPR, Time, Elle, and other publications. Her first book, Beneath the Lion's Gaze, was selected by The Guardian as one of the 10 best contemporary African books. That's quite an achievement for a debut. And she's a recipient of the American Academy of Arts and Letters Award, the Premio El Ponte, and fellowships from the Fulbright Scholar Program, the National Endowment for the Arts, Creative Capital, the Literature House Zurich, and more. Her work can be found in The New Yorker, the New York Review of Books, Granta, The Guardian, the New York Times, Rolling Stone, the BBC, amongst other places. That's quite a long list and quite an achievement. You've made, congratulations, Maaza, and you've made us all proud. And you've made Maaza, the name very international, and congratulations to you and congratulations to all Maazas out there. Apparently, I think they should be happy that they owe you, because apparently it's also a very powerful name back in Addis, As you know, our Chief Justice is called Maaza. And we have prominent artists, prominent journalists named Maaza. So let me start with your name. Why were you called Maaza?
Oh my goodness, that is such a good question. Hale, no one has asked me this. I was named after my grandmother, Maaza. And my mother, Maaza means aroma or essence of something. And my mother's name is Ababa, flower. So it's very interesting that from a scent is a flower and from a flower is a scent. So I've always loved the name because I've always been very, very close to my grandmother. She passed away.
Oh, so it's not the grandmother. Is it your grandmother or your great-grandmother who enlisted for the resistance against the Italian occupation?
My great-grandmother.
What was her name?
Gate A. Gate A.
Okay.
Yeah. And
That's a great name.
Yeah, and it's interesting you're asking about names because the name Gate A I chose it for Hirut's mother's name in the book. Without realizing that's also my great-grandmother's name. It's a very interesting coincidence. I knew her as a Tete.
Okay. Okay, we're hearing some noises from behind. I would like to ask our technicians to handle it. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, interesting conversation about names. Of course, moving on, and I know it's a cliche, but sometimes cliches are good because the basics are very important. So my first question to you is, when did you first consider yourself a writer?
Actually, maybe it's a cliche question, but it's really not it's an interesting progress that I took. I had never imagined being a writer. You can imagine in Abisha families, being a writer is not the first choice that parents have for their children. And I did not know any writers. I didn't come from a family that it was not a family that encouraged that when I was a child. All I knew when I was in school was that I liked to read. And I read everything that I could. And when I went to college, I decided I would try. I was thinking of I would go in. I went in as, to study medicine. And I quickly realized this is not the thing for me. I would be miserable and a very terrible doctor. So I switched to literature. And even then, I only knew I wanted to read, but I did not know I could write. I like to read and analyze literature, and I was reading everything I could. It was not until I graduated from college and I had been working for maybe 7 years that I said, maybe I can try to write something that I have had in my head about my memories from the revolution. I was a child when the revolution started. I knew stories. I had read history. I was always interested in Ethiopian history, but it took, if you can imagine, it took, let's say from that time I thought of this idea until the first book was published, more than 10 years. And it was only when the book was published or almost getting ready to publish that I said, maybe now I'm a writer. Maybe I can do that, because the title for me was such a privilege that I wanted to earn that privilege to be called a writer. So it was when the book was almost published.
It's fascinating because two of your books, they have strong historical foundation. And they are their setting is is based on two of the most important historical and political critical junctions of the 20th century Ethiopian history. You know, the first one, of course, about the last days of Emperor Haile Selassie and the first years of the Derg. And then, of course, the latest book, The Shadow King, is about the Italian occupation and the resistance against the fascist invasion. So, I mean, it's not only typical to you. You know, I was also trying to look at, you know, other books by other prominent Ethiopian writers. And for example, you know, the Mengistu's The Beautiful Things That Heaven Bears. It was about the Red Terror. And Naga Mazlekia's memoir, you know, the Notes from the Highness Belly, was also about the Derg era. The reason why I'm raising this is because, you know, the writing historical novels demand, you know, in-depth and thorough research and having some historical accuracies. So how do you do your research while writing your books?
Well, we can talk about the first book, because the second book was a completely different process. But the first book, the reason that I was motivated and inspired to write that was because I had memories of those years during the Derg, both as a child, when the revolution began, but also when I was a little bit older as a teenager visiting Ethiopia during the Derg regime. So I had memories from early childhood, and I also had memories as a teenager and a young adult when Mengistu was still in power. No one in my family would answer questions for me about my memories when I was a child in Ethiopia. No one wanted to talk about those days. So when I would ask family, why did soldiers come into our house? Who were they looking for? I was about 3 years old at the time, Hale, and because they were looking for somebody in the house, and the adults in the family said, we don't have anyone, and I was standing there, the soldiers came and questioned me because they thought that a little child couldn't lie. And I knew that we were hiding somebody, but I knew I wasn't supposed to know, and I wasn't supposed to tell. So when the soldier comes and went down on his knee and put his rifle behind him, and he said, you know, who's here? Somebody's here. Tell me where they are. And I said, there's nobody. And then they left. But I was never able to get a full answer from my family about what that was. I was told, you don't remember it. That's impossible for you to remember. Nothing happened. And it was only talking to my brother. Sometimes we would start piecing the stories together. But from those memories I had, you know, and there were other memories like this, I said, I think I can write a book based on just memory, based on what I remember and what family members have allowed me to listen to, and what I pick up from parties, you know, because we all have the gatherings where someone begins a story and then people get quiet. And you realize that there's something there that no one wants to talk about. And without realizing it, I was keeping all of those things. So the research for that first book happened after I created a very rough draft of the book. I knew I could write this thing, but I knew eventually I would need to do the research to say, okay, the revolution started this date. I think there were battles on, you know, there were gunfights in these years. This was the war, when the war in Somalia started. I know this, you know, I had to put things in historical context. But I understood or knew enough to begin to write. It was a very interesting process. You know, it was only after the book was published and my family read it that then my mother said, okay, I'm ready to answer your questions now. But it was after that. So that was a very different process. And I was in conversation recently with Adam Rata, and he was, and he was talking about, he lives in Canada, but he said, I never left those years. He said, you never leave those years. And I completely understand that. For him and for me, I was so young, but I never left, because you have questions. And when you ask, how did I get to America? Why am I here? You look back, or I look back. But because there were so many holes, I started to research. But I remembered surprisingly a lot.
That is a profound, a very interesting story indeed. But you have no recollection anymore. Of course, you've never lived through the Italian invasion, and of course that's a completely different period, and that should have demanded going through a lot of historical archives, historical documents, and what the political, social, and economic context looked like back then. And it's a fascinating. So what's behind the title? How, by the way, how do you give titles to your books? And what can you tell us about, the Shadow King? How did you come up with this title?
Well, this is a good, because the Shadow King initially was for me, I wondered when I was researching 1935, 1936, I wondered what Ethiopian fighters felt when Haile Selassie left the country. This was the first emperor that left his people in the midst of a war. And how demoralizing would that have been to many, these farmers who were risking everything, these people, these villagers who were risking everything, and then to find out, because of course the Italians made sure everybody in Ethiopia understood that their emperor, had left them. They were going to break the people's spirit in addition to breaking them physically. People knew that he had left, and I wondered, what would somebody do if you had an army? If I had an army, what would I do fighting in the highlands of Ethiopia? And I knew from my research of World War II that Adolf Hitler and Mussolini had, each of them had at least 5 men that looked exactly like them.
That's right.
And right, so whenever Hitler was somewhere, there was his body double somewhere else. When Mussolini's somewhere, his body double somewhere else. Sometimes the Allied troops would kill someone and think it was Hitler or Mussolini. It's actually the double. Poor people. Their mistake, their curse was to look like these devils. And I wondered, what if there was a man who looked just like Haile Selassie? And in fact, he's just a poor peasant who doesn't want the job. He doesn't want it at all. But what if in a land that has been left in darkness, because Haile Selassie was called a son, unto his people. When the sun leaves, yeah. And when the sun leaves, this country is in shadow. And from the shadows comes a king. So I thought, this is the Shadow King, this man named Minim.
That's a powerful process.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating process.
It was really interesting to create Minim, and I gave him that name Minim. The story of his childhood, I don't think much of it came into the book. I had it written. I have his whole biography written, but I couldn't put much in the book. But he was born, and his mother said Minim because there's nothing else that she could want.
Interesting.
And yeah, but the irony, I thought, of a man who was very poor named Minim representing a man who might have everything but left would be an interesting thing as a writer to play with.
That's fascinating. I'm glad I asked you that question. And the staying with the Shadow King, one of the reviews described it as, I quote, Mengiste's potent writing style echoes the bold woman it portrays while refusing to let this amazing woman fade into the shadows of men. And this book, I think, it highlighted the place and role women have in our history. Not only just in our history, but in one of the most defining moments of our modern history. Mm-hmm. So, how do you see, there's a lot of agency, there's a lot of autonomy and independence in the woman that we find in this book. And this was at a time when most of these women were not recipient of, modern education or empowerment, classes, or, an infrastructure that led them in a way to be who they were. So my question now is, of course, how do you see, the role of women in our current political and public life, especially in light of, the such fascinating and powerful stories of women throughout our existence?
I think I have always said, I don't know any weak women. I know women who are not being listened to. I know women that don't believe that they are being heard, but I don't know many. I didn't grow up with weak women in my family, even if they never went to school. In my how many I'm one generation, 2 generations removed from people who were farmers and illiterate. I don't know weak women. And when I look at the women today, and especially, in Ethiopian culture, I see those women, we can go from the president to the other Maaza you talked about, Burtukan, these women are walking in the path that other women before them have helped to create. Mm-hmm. Their mothers, their grandmothers, great-grandmothers. And there's another generation now that's coming up in Ethiopia, and they are pushing for even greater rights, for the rights of women to be free of domestic violence, to be free of sexual violence, to be absolutely liberated, not to be like men, because men are not always free, but to be liberated, for real liberations and freedoms. And I see those women, those younger women too, they mirror for me the battles that Hirut in my book was also fighting. And it's just a different era, but our State Advenyoch are here still.
Amen. Yeah, it's a very interesting way of looking at, the current role of women in our public life. And, staying within our country, and in one of your interviews, you mentioned Danyacho Worku as one of your inspirations and influences along the likes of, Toni Morrison and Homer. And is that because of the fact that he wrote in English, of course, The 13th Son? By the way, you know what The 13th Son is, it's Pagme, and actually we're in Pagme now. We're just days away from the Ethiopian New Year. Actually, yes. I want to extend my early New Year wishes. Welcome Addis Summit.
Welcome Addis Summit.
Is it because of The 13th Son or Adifis? Do you read, Ethiopian literature written in local languages, or do you have other Ethiopian authors and writers that influenced your work? Some classics, or even contemporary. You've mentioned Adam Retar, for example, one of the one of the giants of contemporary Ethiopian literature. Yeah. So, what do you say about this?
So I think, my education was, I left Ethiopia when I was young because of the revolution, the Derg. My education was in English. And for a long time in my educational system, in the schools that I went to, no one told me that Ethiopian literature existed. I wasn't taught that in school. The literature that I was taught were the American, British, white writers. They were mostly men. And it was not until I went to college and I was looking at my literature courses, and I said, there's nothing here I really want to read. And a teacher, I talked to a professor, she said, well, why don't you and I design a course and you tell me what you want to read? I said, I want Ethiopian literature. And she was British, and she said, well, where is that? I said, I think in the library. You know, I think I can find this. I just started researching, and Danyachu Warku was one of the first. Gabramadan, the poet, Sadgai Gabramadan was one of the others that I had picked. I just gathered everything I could find. What was it? The Kabra Negist. Everything I could find, I brought to this professor and said, I want to read these. And she said, well, oh my goodness, we will try this. So I just started reading. And I think when I read The 13th Son, I said, this is me, this is my country, this is my story. And it opened up for me the parameters of what literature was. Suddenly the borders exploded. Mm-hmm. For me, and I could understand things in that book because of my experiences in Ethiopia, because of other stories I had read, because of conversations with family. So I've since read other works by Danyacho Warku, and some short stories of his, and it's been, that's right. And it's really, I'm so thankful that he existed and his work is out there. Unfortunately, we can talk about this later. I had to look for work that was translated or written in English because of my education here in the United States. But one thing would lead me to another, and I'm still exploring. There's still books that I can't find or I'm trying to find by Ethiopian writers. But another one of these influences that I have had, and some of it is in the Shadow King. When I think of storytelling in Ethiopia, I think of the oral tradition. Mm-hmm. I think that as much as anything, Kane and Samana work, all these things that we have, which is for me much richer in many ways than what Western literature has. When we tell stories, we don't even have to read them, but when we're in a family gathering, and people are telling stories, and I'm listening, I said, this is poetry. This person is a novelist, even if they don't know it. These people are fantastic writers. They are crafting with their voice. And I wanted to see, how can I represent that in the book? And I thought of Asmari, the Asmarioch. I was in Addis just before the pandemic hit, in December, January, and near Gondar, went to an Asmari Beit. Oh my God, so funny. So funny, so embarrassing, true. But I was watching this woman and I said, she's magnificent and she's brilliant, because within a minute, she knows exactly how to pick on somebody. Mm-hmm. She knows exactly what to say. And I imagined, and imagine this in 1935, Hale, when the villages are being destroyed, the Asmari become a weapon to continue to remember villagers. That's right. To continue to keep Ethiopian history and customs and stories alive. And I always imagined them also as relaying news from one area to another, singing the songs of battles. And I wanted to honor that also, and honor the storytelling that is in Ethiopia even now in the books. They have really influenced me.
Interesting. Next time you're in Addis, I promise to take you to another Asmari Beit.
Please, okay, I will find you.
And yeah, you are an Ethiopian woman of your woman of Ethiopian origin. You're a Black woman. You're an African woman. You have multiple identities, mm-hmm. And of course, there isn't much Ethiopian literature in English. that's for sure. But Danyacho's 13th Son was also part of the African Writers series.
Yes.
That, you know, we grew up reading. By the way, I did literature in college as well. My first degree was in literature.
Ah, bravo!
and we were really inspired by, you know, this giants. Of course, mostly men.
Yeah, of course.
It was, but we knew about Najib Mahfouz, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Chinua Achebe, Wolo Soyinka, Ayekwe Armah. I mean, these are giants of, you know, the second half of the 20th century African literature. So how much were you influenced by these people? I mean, because beyond Ethiopian identity, you have an African identity. You're a Black woman in the international literary scene. You're still Black, of African origin. And now we're witnessing, I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong, but we're witnessing a trend, you know, but, you know, the men, you know, the literary landscape, you know, when 40, 50 years back, it was mostly male dominated. Now there's you, there is Aminata Forna, there is Taye Selassie, there is Chimamanda Adichie. So first, of course, how did the, you know, the African Writers series, the Achebes, the Soyinkas influenced you? And second, do you see a trend where the male-dominated literary landscape on the continent being invaded by, you know, emerging, you know, women writers?
I think, you know, in terms, you're talking the way the Heinemann publishing, that Heinemann collection of African writers, when I discovered those, you know, partly Danyacho Warko was in that series, and I think Sahle, I think there were a few other Ethiopian writers. I don't want to make a mistake. It reaffirmed for me that there was writing, of course, coming from the continent. Vital, vibrant, vivid literature. But one of the first writers I read, a little bit separate from the Heinemann collection, was Ama Ata Aidu from Ghana. And Our Sister Killjoy was a book that energized me and inspired me, because this was a story of a woman who was Black, who was African, who is immigrant, lives in Europe, and is trying to understand who she is in the middle of this very different and strange culture. And it was one book that spoke to me on so many levels, and then it was written beautifully. It reaffirmed the place of women and experiences of women within literature. I've been, you know, you mentioned, you know, there's Chimamanda Adichie, the Aminata Forna is just an incredibly brilliant writer, Zukiswa Vanner. There are people that, the women are here, you know, women in many ways have been there, but now the landscape is changing, and they can't be ignored. You know, Bessie Head was publishing decades ago. There is a generation that has always been there, but people are beginning to recognize the genius that was always at work. But because the voices of men would be listened to as opposed to women, that's where history made a mistake. And now I think that is being corrected. And it's not only the new generation, but also there are people in the new generation, they're paying homage to, they're recognizing the women from an older generation that helped create a landscape that makes the work of new writers possible. I find it exciting and more interesting, frankly.
Okay. You now, I think, probably will get back to the Shadow King with questions. I think I'd like to recognize about 50 participants are still there. We thank you for joining us this evening, you know, this great conversation with Maaza. There will be a session, there will be a section where you'll be able to present your questions for Maaza. So hang on there. So moving on to your new project, it's a fascinating project. You know, I found it very fascinating. Of course, I had a hard time reading the last section of the book. Addis Ababa, Noir?
Noir,
Is that right?
Noir.
Noir.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I apologize.
That's okay, don't worry.
I'm kidding. Is that French?
It
Is
is
that
French.
French?
I don't know. They use the French word for,
Okay. So
yeah.
you succeeded in gathering such a fascinating collection of people, established and prominent authors and emerging young writers in this project. I see some people I know. Of course, you have Adam Retta. He is the giant of contemporary Ethiopian literature, and Bokatu Suyu, a poet, a social critic of this generation. But you also have emerging voices like Girmati Fantaye, Rebecca Saha, Hannah Georgis, Lelise Girma. I also see Linda Johannes. She's also here. I think she's watching this. Hi, Linda.
Hi,
And so it's a fascinating collection of different generation of Ethiopian authors. How did the idea came about to come out to produce this work?
The publisher approached me and said, we have a series called Noir, and they've been doing for different cities. For example, Nairobi Noir, or Tel Aviv Noir, or Berlin Noir, or Accra Noir. And the publisher, Johnny Temple, said, would you like to do an Addis Ababa Noir? And I said, immediately I said, yes, of course, I would love to do this. I thought this is a fantastic way to get writers together from different, from Ethiopia, and create a book and use that book as an opportunity for these writers to get a wider audience, to get more publicity. And I thought, not only will the West know about Ethiopian writers, but on the continent of Africa, when we talk about African literature, I don't want people to always think about Nigeria. Sorry, Nigerian friends who are there.
Don't forgive you, okay. Amanda will reach out.
I know, I'm sure I'm going to get something, but we need to think about Ethiopian literature as well. It's not just Chinua Achebe.
Yeah.
Whoa, sorry, Nigeria. So if so I think how can we do this? And Adam Retta was one of these writers. I said, my God, if he would agree to do this, I would be so honored. It would be fantastic. It took a long time to gather all the writers. I could get one or two or three or four, but then others I would ask would say, I don't have the time, I'm working on something, or somebody would say yes and then drop out. So to gather these writers together took a little bit of time. But when that compilation was finished, when I gathered them, I said, this is wonderful that they are here. And there's a mix of, men and women. They're written in English, but also written in Amharic and translated. There are writers from they were all picked different sections of Addis Ababa. There were people writing about different topics, some political, some not. And it was interesting and really a joy to work with that.
Yeah, and I think, I was trying to look at, the different sections of this book that I will not again try to pronounce. One of the contributors, Tafari Nguse Tafa, he tries to explore, the probably one of the most written about historical moments in modern Ethiopian history, the 1974 revolution, and communal tensions, ethnic tensions, ethnic violence, and of course it's a problem that we still facing in this country. We still have a lot of communal challenges. We still have problems with nation building. There are a lot of debates about what needs to be Ethiopian, and a lot of debates about history, historical figures, historical institutions, and about what kind of nation we try to envision for the future. So I think Tafari tried to look at that, ethnic tensions and violence from the perspective of 1974 revolution. But the question here is, for you, what do you think literature can play? What is literature, the role of literature, in nation building, in easing communal tension and violence?
That is a good question. That is a question that I have been asking myself, both here in the United States, as we slowly start turning towards authoritarian rule, if we're not already in it now, and also thinking of Ethiopia and, different, I think this pandemic especially has raised issues of what literature can do. The way I think about it is, I can learn, literature may not be able to change policy, but literature can make an effect on a human being. And that human being can talk to other people. And those other people can eventually make change. But it begins with sitting with ideas that we that might make us uncomfortable, that might make us angry, that might make us sad, that might make us want to, get up from the book and leave. But if it's written well, if it's written in a way that you care about the characters and you become invested in them, then there's a moment where literature can change you. And this is the power of literature, is looking at removing the news, removing the newspaper articles and saying, here's one human being and this is how those events affected their life. And can you look at this person as a human being? And that is where I think the greatest power comes. And I know when I have read certain books, it has introduced me to things, cultures that I would never have known. But when I hear news now from that culture, from that country, from the groups of people, I understand there are human beings, not just headlines. And that is where the power lies.
Thanks so much for such a great answer, Maaza. And this leads me to, by the way, we still have a lot of people out there. This is a Sunday night in Addis, and having this much audience is, I think, great. And I think Ephraim and the team are organizing, the infrastructure for the questions. I'm not sure if questions are asked through writing or people are going to speak live to you. I think they will arrange and they'll get back to me with the answers.
Okay.
But regarding, in some places, actually, 3 years ago, I was in Scotland, and I was very much moved by, the fact that, their greatest heroes were not their kings or political leaders, in a way, their greatest heroes and people that are considered to be founding fathers are people who have, contributed for the literary history of that country. They are poets, authors, writers, so I was very much impressed. And so I agree with you that literature can and should play a great role in, in nation building and creating a cohesive, just and inclusive social space and political space. So coming back to you, The Shadow King, it's a great book. You're nominated for the Oscar of, books, and but the majority of Ethiopians are unable to access it because first, of course, it is the major barrier being the language. So are there any plans to translate this work into local Ethiopian languages?
I don't know if it's a yes or it's not a no. That question is not a no. But we are there's some conversations happening. That's what I can say. There's some conversations happening. Yeah, it is a start. And I think for the first time, I feel more hopeful that it is going to happen than I have in a while. And so my dream is to have this translated in Amharic, you know, printed, distributed, to create in a viable, you know, industry in Ethiopia. So it's been a dream, and I've been hoping that this would happen. The pandemic seemed to slow down a lot of things, but now it's starting up again, and I have faith that some of these conversations that are happening will actually create something for this. So I'm optimistic that that will happen.
Yeah, I mean, this takes me back to, you know, one of the topics that I really want to address and raise in this conversation, you know, the issue of language representation. You know, it's about language is a key element, you know, both at the international level or at the global, at the national level. It's the greatest tool of hegemony, as you know very well. You've lived in Italy, and definitely you've read Gramsci, and you know, Ethiopia is one of the oldest countries on the continent, but its stories are not well represented on the African literature landscape. And I believe language could be one factor, you know, that prevented, you know, of course, I mean, the overall literary landscape is not a very rich one, considering the history of the country. And the long history of statehood, and the long history of literary culture in this country. But language also played a role, you know, even the works that were written in local languages, they are not known for the international, you know, audience. So, you know, for most African countries, you know, because of colonization, or Western education, people are taught in English, or their working languages are international. So they have access to you know, the international markets or the international platforms. So how do you see the prospect of, you know, usually the greatest books from Ethiopia that are making into the international market are people like you or Dina Mengistu. I mean, people who leave the country, who is Ethiopian origin, living somewhere else. So do you think, I mean, how do you see the prospect of Ethiopian literature, you know, in the international and continental perspective?
Thank you for that question. That's really something that I have been thinking about now for a number of years. It has been my dream to work with people in Ethiopia to make translation possible, available, to train translators from the different languages in Ethiopia into English, to train, you know, people move from English into some of the languages spoken in Ethiopia. I think that this is the greatest barrier, because the literature is there, and I think that there is an audience. But the translation has been that challenge, but it is not impossible. And in fact, it's very easy to get past this. So I don't want to say very much, but I am in talks with some people, and I'm also very personally interested in what I can do to help create a translation industry in Ethiopia. It's part of the publishing industry. You know, you have editors, but we also need translators. How do we develop that talent? How do we encourage people to do that? How can we create platforms? Because the one thing the pandemic showed me very quickly is that when we get online, there are no borders. You know, when we are online, there's no need for a visa to move from one place to the other. And this new landscape that we've entered into, through Zoom or through whatever, Google Hangouts or any other things, it's completely erased one of the biggest barriers for most of this education, which is travel and cost. And how can we take advantage of this? I have, you know, it sometimes will keep me awake at night thinking about this, but I am deeply passionate about exactly what you are saying. The literature is there. Where are the translators, and how can I and other people who are working also with this endeavor, how can we bring those translators forward and train and give them access? So if there are people who are translators and interested in this, I hope that I can hear from you in some way. It may not happen tomorrow, but we are in the process of making it happen. Yeah.
I think one of the objectives of organizing such such platforms by HOHE, I believe, is also to facilitate, to create an industry, because right now, I think I don't think we can say there is a publishing industry in Ethiopia, because an industry needs to have a comprehensive ecosystem that includes, of course, a translation, the translation element of the industry. And I believe HOHE takes this comments from you very seriously, and it will continue to work on, you know, facilitating the translation of Ethiopian artistic and, you know, literary works into international languages. So I'm almost done with my time, so I have to leave the time for the audience that's waiting patiently. But before I leave, I want to get back to, you know, you say one of the things that keeps you at night awake, you know, that keeps you awake at night is the issue of, you know, this how to make the literary work in Ethiopia to the international audience. So that's with that question, I want to ask how does your writing process look like? I mean, do you have? Please describe us, you know, your writing space in time. I mean, do you usually write at night or at daytime? Where do you write? You know, at the office, at Starbucks, or, you know, where do you write? I mean, usually, I mean, like, people who write at Starbucks are pretenders, you know. I'm kidding.
Halle, you just showed
I usually
up
go to Starbucks. I mean, to you know, to project, you know, a smart look, you know, that I'm a serious person. Where do you write and when?
Oh, and someone said which music. Well, this is I'm at my writing desk right now. I don't know if you can see, if I have photographs in the back here. Okay, I'm gonna move this camera.
Please. Okay, whoa.
Can you see? So this is
see a lot of old pictures.
These are old pictures. These
are a lot of old pictures.
They're all old. Yes. Yes.
That's your setting.
This is my space. Okay. This is my space. So when I am writing, I have these people like this. Whoops. This person here staring at me.
Okay.
You know, these are the people that were around me when I was writing my novel. And it was an inspiration because these are photographs from 1935. This is 1910, maybe? 1913? This one here. But I have these photographs, and this is my desk. This is the place I write. I will, it's generally quiet. I listen to all different kinds of music. Somebody said
this is a great picture as well.
Yeah, yes. And
Is this part of the pictures?
It is, that one is somewhere in a frame, yeah, a little bit away from here, but she's now in the book. And I use those as inspiration. I used them as inspiration for my scenes. And I write at my desk, but I will sometimes go to a library, and it's a very, very quiet place. I can sit in a corner where nobody walks by because nobody wants the books that the desk is near, and I write there. I don't write at Starbucks. But I will sometimes go
I
to a
pretend to,
cafe.
you know.
Yeah, I will go to a cafe on when I have really bad days. I will go there and pretend to write. But really, yeah, the writing happens at the desk, and when I am on deadline and I have editing and I am, every day I'm in the morning, I will sit and write before I start the rest of my day. On weekends, I'm not teaching, I'm not working, I sit and I write. So my nights are sometimes taken, but my mornings and then the weekends are taken, which means that through the years of writing this book, I really did not have much of a social life. I was not visiting friends. I was not doing those things because all of the time was taken with the novel. Now I'm in between books, which is a different process.
I am in between jobs. I don't want to say unemployed. I don't want to say unemployed, but I'm in between jobs as well.
In between jobs is the best way.
Yeah.
And I keep a notebook. I keep a notebook, and I take notes on ideas that come up, and once the ideas get solid, so, really solid and start to grow, until then, I'm just taking notes and reading. But I'm doing that every day.
What book are you reading right now?
I just finished, well, I'm reading some books I have to write reviews, but I just finished this book. The review came out today. It's Yad Jasi, and
Okay.
she's writing about a Ghanaian immigrant family living in America.
Wow.
A really wonderful book. And I just finished another book by a Rwandan writer, Scholastique Mukasonga, and that it's called Igifu, Igifu, Igifu.
Okay.
It's very, very short, but very powerful. And I read poetry. Aracelis Girmay, who's half Puerto Rican and half Eritrean, is a beautiful poet, but I'm constantly reading something, and I'm usually reading more than one book at once.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So staying within the reading thing, I always debate with my friends, who love audiobooks. Is listening to an audiobook equal to reading a book?
Oh no.
It's not, right?
You really want to start a war, Hali?
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. What's your view on audiobooks?
I
hope my friends are listening.
Yeah, let's see. I will tell you that
I like it. I like it, hard copy. I like it.
I read in hard copy. I did try audiobook on a long drive I was making at some point, and I remember I put the audiobook on, and as I was driving, I started falling asleep. So I like to read. I like to read that, so I'm sorry to disappoint.
So in short, you're saying that listening to an audiobook, and people who listen to an audiobook shouldn't say they read the book.
Oh no.
Okay, I'm kidding.
Really?
Okay. I think I have to I think you can start responding to some of the questions in the chat room.
Okay.
But I think there's a mechanism. I just received a text from Ephraim telling me that people also can raise their hands and, present their questions directly to you. And I don't see, I hope our technical team is there. I think they're receiving questions, but while we're trying to get some hands from the audience. So just probably the last question from me is, because you start talking about your process and you've shown us your notebook where you jot down your ideas. I hope nobody took a screenshot and stole your idea. But so what comes first usually in writing a book for you? Is it the plot or the characters?
Well, For these, I think for me, because I write historical books, and there's usually a moment in history that attracts me first. But then from that, I start looking for the character before I get the plot. You know, a historical event is not the plot. A historical event is just the background, really. But if I can find the character, then I follow them and I can begin to develop the plot based on that character. So it sometimes takes a while to find that. And yeah, that with this book, The Shadow King, it took a while to find Hirut. Yeah, but I had to find her to find the plot.
So there's a question that I received from Mustafa Ahmed, who asked, how was the reception of The Shadow King in Ethiopia? Of course, I've raised the issue of, the plans to translate it into, local languages, Amharic or any other local languages. So how did you see the reception of The Shadow King from an Ethiopian audience?
It has been a wonderful reception so far. What has been most interesting for me is the messages that I will get back from Ethiopians saying, because of your book, I talked to one of my relatives and I found out that my great-grandmother or my aunt or my grandmother was involved in the war and I had no idea. Or they will talk to their family and discover things about their grandfather or great-grandfather or uncle's stories as well. Those are amazing to hear. It feels like this history is opening up. We know part of the history, but I really don't think we know all of it. And that it's been wonderful to see that reception. So I think we're moving on to a screen now.
Yeah. And there's another question from Tadde, who said Addis Ababa, what was the last thing? Noir?
Yeah, noir, the French word, yeah.
Addis Ababa Noir. Is Addis Ababa Noir strictly about dark story series? He's asking, is there another version for bright story series?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, the noir, the word noir is a genre. It's a genre of writing that's mostly detective, crime, suspense, thriller stories, and so the publisher wants to do a series of these across different, cities in the world. What are the noir stories for Tel Aviv, for example, or this? So the noir series is specifically dark stories. That is the publisher's framing of this whole series.
They are shadow stories.
Yeah, so it's it's interesting when I was talking to the writers because, in Ethiopia, Ethiopian literature doesn't really have a noir tradition. Detective series, that's noir. Crime fiction is noir. It's all under that. It's dark. They're darker.
Okay.
And so when I was talking to the writers about what noir is, I said, these are stories that have there's no moral at the end of a noir, of crime fiction. It's really, so I told them, there's no real happy ending here with crime stories, suspense stories, scary stories. There's no happy ending. And this is something about noir is set in a world of crime, detectives, they're trying to solve something in some way. I said, but you can do with what you want with that, but how do you interpret this? The most interesting, yeah.
Okay, please.
The most interesting thing was that all of these writers did something different with their definition of noir. However, there were many stories that dealt with the dark time, the revolution, which was also interesting. And there were stories with ghosts and spirits, which was it was distinct to this this series, this Addis Ababa Noir. I don't think Nairobi Noir had that. I don't think Tel Aviv Noir had something like that. So this was very specific. And I found that very, very interesting when people thought, the writers thought of noir. And I asked Adam Retta how he interpreted noir. And he said his first thought was, these are stories like in detectives or criminal stories, crime, where maybe somebody vanishes, you know, and people are trying to find this person and see if they were killed and then who killed them. He said, but when I think of vanishing people, I think of refugees. And that was something he said that he said, so I put the migration and refugee crisis in the center of noir, which I found incredible. And his story is amazing, but everybody interpreted in a different way. If we do the happy stories, it's not noir. So that would be a different series, maybe a different publisher.
We have a very interesting question from Livingston Mukasa. It looks like a Ugandan name. If you're still there, Mambo from Addis, he asked a very interesting questions. First, he congratulated you for such an inspirational career. And he asks, if you could write a novel set in any non-Ethiopian but African historical era or setting, what would it be?
Whoa.
That's a powerful question.
If it's not Ethiopia?
This is a strong question. I mean, this is so hard. It made you pause. You never paused for any question.
Okay, wait. I think I know. So this is what I would do. I would write a story set along the Arab slave trade. And I would follow the route and tell stories from each of those. I think that has also been very, very interesting to me, because that route, it shaped Africa. It shaped what we know of the cultures, the communities that formed. I think that would be fascinating. I don't know what era, but that might be something I would do.
Okay, I'm looking at Mukasa right now, and I think he's happy with the answer. Hi, Mukasa. And we have another question from Tinnabab Gabra Meskel. She asked, how do you know when you want to write a new book? Probably your bank account go low.
Yeah, well, it's still low, honey. Trust me, that's nothing new. Okay. But I think right now, I'm in the middle, but the energy is coming back. It's when I finished this book and I finished my first book, it took a long time for my brain to feel like there was energy to think of another project that would take more than 2 or 3 or 4 years. You have to, prepare yourself mentally. It takes a lot of stamina, also emotionally, to do this, because every day, my entire life changes. Every day I sit at my desk. So when I feel that energy coming and the ideas are there and I'm excited again, which I am with, I think, a new project, I start with that notebook, and then it slowly leads to pages.
Interesting. And we have another question from Anna. And she asked, thanks for this amazing conversation. Can Maaza speak about the role of photography in her novel?
Yeah, thank you for that. I was very interested in the role of photography in shaping not only what the West knew of Africa, but what the West knew of Ethiopia. The first camera came into Ethiopia, I believe, during the Napier expedition, with the destruction of Magdala, and Lij Alamayu was taken to Britain, but the camera came in, and the British during that expedition were photographing different aspects of Ethiopian culture in order to justify the looting and the destruction that they did there, in order to justify what they would continue to do, what they hoped for a number of years. The Italians came into Ethiopia with the cameras. The invasion was in 1935, but Italians were in that region much earlier. And Mussolini had the desire to invade Ethiopia, years before that. But he was sending journalists there to photograph, to justify the invasion that would come. If you could photograph people who were doing things that the West might say is barbaric,
yes,
or savage, you can justify how cruel you are to them.
yes.
And I wanted to talk about that and comment on that in the book by having a character, a soldier who is Italian and a photographer in the war. And I wanted to look at his photographs, and I wanted the readers to understand the way the photographs were manipulated as a weapon of war. And so it was, the photographs played a very big role.
Yeah, and Alamayo is asking, it's a pity that we don't have so many writers, despite the fact that we have a lot to tell to the world. So my question to you is, as a father who would like to encourage his children to read more and to write more, what would you advise me to do that I can nurture my children's writing passion?
No matter how old they are, read with them. And if they are children, read to them. But if they see you reading, it will be very normal to pick up a book. And it doesn't matter what you read. It doesn't have to be difficult. It can be just something very simple or something that you enjoy. People sometimes tell me I feel so guilty because I like romance books. And I say, read them. It's just that your reading is the most important thing. I read comics. I read graphic novels. I love them. And I don't feel guilty about it. I love to read them. And so encourage children to read what they find interesting and read with them also. And that grows. It creates a passion for literature.
And, Tade is asking, he's trying to, examine the dynamics between imagination and research in writing a book. He's asking, do you find it necessary to travel to places when you're doing your research, like traveling to Italy and Ethiopia for the Shadow King? So how much of it is research and how much of it is imagination in a way? How do you find the balance between the two?
I do have to travel. It helps me. I traveled to Ethiopia several times, just for research. Towards the end of when the book was close to publishing, but I was still in the process of editing, I had to travel to Gondar in order to I knew the location, but I needed to be there so I could see the landscape. And I was trying to make sure that the landscape could hold the battles that I created. Because if I'm writing a scene where the Arbenyoj are hiding in the caves, I have to find that area in Gondar where there are caves. I have to find the exact location. I went to the Simien Mountains because I know that this is where people were hiding. But once I went there, I realized this landscape is completely impossible for battles. But, I could only learn that by going and looking. So it was important. And same thing in Italy. I needed to go to some of the places where Ettore's parents lived, where he would have grown up, because it helped form for me a world that I could put them in. So it is, who knows now with this pandemic, maybe it's just through Google Maps, but I tried to Google Map Ethiopia, some of the highlands areas, and it's just not very good. So I had to go there.
Okay. And, I remember, I've been following you on Twitter for years now. Your I mean, it's always a joy to follow, you know, what you tweet and post on Twitter. And we somehow followed, you know, the ups and downs of, you know, the writing, you know, we followed the completion, the publication, you know, of the Shadow King. It was out there, it was public. And it's such a joy, I mean, to witness that, such a book that we followed, its writing and publication, the ups and downs of, you know, its production has made it to be one of, you know, the best books of the year. And my question here is, what is your favorite part and your least favorite part of the publishing journey? And to also tell us about your first, I mean, your first book was received very well. You know, what was the journey like?
So, well, the journey was long. You know, this between the first book and this book was 10 years. It was a long process, and when I was in the process of publishing or writing The Shadow King, I really did not know for sure if I would finish the book. I was in the middle of the book and it didn't seem to be going well. I didn't like what I was doing. I wasn't sure that I was getting the characters or any of that. But the process of writing is that you, despite those things, you keep writing. And it's the creative process is, you know, it's deceptive, because you think if somebody's at a desk and they're writing a book, it's almost like a hobby. But this is real work, you know, and thinking and research and creating a world and making it believable to yourself. It was a difficult process. It was many hours, many weeks, many years of work and doubts and fears. I didn't think I would get the book finished. So when the book was finished, that was enough for me. I was thrilled and then when the reviews started coming and people, you know, were understanding the kind of story I wanted to tell, that felt like an honor. And I was deeply grateful. And sometimes it would, you know, it was very emotional for me to get those kinds of responses. And now that it's on this list, I have no words. I think when my editor called me to tell me the news that I was on the long list, I couldn't speak for a long time. And then after a while, I just started screaming on the telephone. So I'm overjoyed that it's made it this far, especially from those moments where I didn't know that it would happen. But my favorite part of this process is really when it's done. But the editing is also fun. So those of you who are writing and you're doing your first draft, it's okay. The best part is really the editing of what you have.
It's somehow, you somehow respond to the question from Nguru, who asked, you know, Maaza, before even publishing Beneath the Lion's Gaze, what were you doing profession-wise, and how did your economic situation at the time facilitate your penning down the novel?
Oh, my economic situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's asking, I'm assuming it's a he, he's asking, what were you doing profession-wise when you wrote Beneath the Lion's Gaze?
I was a graduate student. That's an excellent, I will tell you, I mean, the economics of writing is something that maybe we don't talk enough about. It's a whole other conversation, but I was a graduate student. I was supporting myself. I was working full-time, taking classes part-time, and then writing in my free time. I was in school with people who didn't need to work, you know, who just they didn't, I had to do it. You know, there were other people supporting themselves, but I had to work. And it's part of the reason that my education took longer. And I went to graduate school only when I could afford to go to graduate school, which also explains why in my graduate school, I was one of the oldest students, because I didn't go from undergraduate stage straight to graduate. I had to work for a number of years to even have the money to go to school. So economics played a big role in when the book was published, how long it took to write it. I didn't move as fast as my other classmates because of that. But the good thing about that is writing a book at my age, which was older for my graduate students, writing the book at that age, as opposed to when I came out just from undergraduate, my degree, I was an older student. I had lived more, I had worked more, and I really knew the story that I wanted to write. I don't think I could have written that book right out of undergraduate years. And those years helped me become a better writer, even if I didn't know it. So I'm glad for those years, but economics was a big part of how quickly I could write both books, frankly. I was constantly working.
Last two questions, one from Abraham Gudisa, and the last one is another one from Tadde. I will start with Abraham Gudisa, who said, "Thank you for the book, Maaza. Ethiopia has been redefined since 1992, but English literature by Ethiopian authors, including your two books, paint a picture of Ethiopia where the country is only the Amharic speaking and of the Orthodox Christian. Is there a fair assessment to say that your book has imperial/nationalist undertones?"
I think that's an interesting question, but one book is not going to answer everybody's imperatives. I wrote from a perspective that was what my family knew. I was listening to stories of my family, my uncles, my grandfather who had fought in the northern highlands of Ethiopia. I was interested in those stories, but I was also very interested because of what I witnessed as a child of the distinct class systems in Ethiopia. What I began to understand of the way that the poorest of the poor are treated, people who are enslaved, and that no one really wanted to talk about. Those things captured my imagination. I think that there need to be more stories from different groups, different perspectives, different vantage points of history. The fact that this book should never be thought of as the single history of Ethiopia, I think that's unfair for any work of fiction. This is fiction, not a historical text. So I encourage everybody to write, and those who are eager to see their stories up should be writing those or encouraging other writers and helping to give them a platform. But no writer, no voice, no critic has the only story in Ethiopia. That's impossible. With 90 million people, it's not going to happen.
It's more than 100 now.
Now more than 100.
Yeah, and I think the last question from the audience, and probably for myself as well, we're almost there. It is from Tadde. I think he's been following this conversation very closely. And he said, you mentioned your mother told you the untold part of the Derg/Bread Terror stories after The Lion's Gaze was published. Do you think it would have changed the storyline if you had been told the complete story?
That's such a good question.
Yeah, it's a very good one.
You know, what she told me, again, I was basing the Beneath the Lion's Gaze on just my own intimate memories. These are my own memories. And so when my mother was telling me some of the stories, what was very shocking to me was the way that what I remembered actually what I had put in the book that I thought I made up because I couldn't remember everything. There were things she said, no, you didn't make that up. That actually happened in our family. That was interesting to know. And I think, so Tade, what was so powerful for me was the parallels between what I thought I made up and what my mother said, no, that was actually what happened. And memory is powerful. And I think we remember much more than we understand, especially when we're children. And sometimes we think we make something up when we're writers, and it's actually true.
Thanks so much, Maaza. I mean, it was a very enlightening conversation. It was a great honor. It was a great joy to have you on the, on the inaugural session of this conversation series by HOHE. We're very happy for you. Congratulations for being shortlisted for the Booker Prize. I hope it will go further. Thank you so much. And we wish you a happy new year.
Thank you. Welcome.
We look forward to have you in Addis on a live event, sometime in the post-corona event, period. And I would like to, I'm surprised, Linda, one of the contributors to the Addis Noah, she was there. I was expecting some questions from her. She was quite throughout. I don't know why. But I would like to thank the participants, the audience who
thank you for all the questions.
Yeah, who attended this, on a Sunday night for Addis and for East Africa and for most of the people who took part from Africa, and for you for giving us your Sunday morning, and for HOHE for organizing such great conversation.
Thank you.
And last words.
Thank you, Hale. Thank you so much. Thank you to HOHE and Ephraim and for all of you that asked questions and joined in. This was really special for me. So thank you all.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week ahead. And we'll sign up for future HOHE events. Good night.
Good night.